Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me again on the Better Deal podcast. And today we have a very special guest, Sarah Jones SIMMER, an investor and advisor and a former C-level executive from Bumble. Hello, Sarah, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Liina. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. I've been really looking forward to this episode, to have this chat with you. So it's going to be a good one for sure.
Me too.
Firstly, I guess let's talk a little bit about you. So can you share your story with us, your career and aspirations, and what has inspired you throughout your life?
Sure. So going way back, I was born and raised in New Jersey, right outside of Manhattan. I went to music school, actually, and was a flute performance major at a conservatory, which is a, shall we say, non-typical career path for a tech executive. And then ultimately, I studied abroad in Europe, in the Czech Republic, actually, right as they were acceding to the EU. And it was really eye-opening for me. And as much as I loved music and performing and had always felt like that was my calling, it seemed like the world was just so much bigger than that. And as much as I wanted to play in an orchestra for the rest of my life, there were so many other things that were interesting to me and that I wanted to explore. And I think that curiosity becomes a red thread throughout my career. And so when I got back from study abroad, I picked up a minor in econ to build a few more hard skills and did not know what I was going to do coming out of undergrad. A bachelor of music and flute performance, it sets you up for a limited set of career opportunities. And so I joined AmeriCorps, which is like the Peace Corps, but for domestic assignments. And I went to Chicago. I worked in low-income communities in Chicago on financial readiness. And so we did everything from tax preparation to financial access for college and undergrad. University is very expensive in the United States. And also financial literacy and getting people in bank accounts. And for me, there was a big unlock there around money and how money creates opportunity. And not only is there a challenge around liquidity and where capital is flowing, but there's this piece around education as well, and whether people really even understand how money works and how the financial system is supposed to support them or not. And it was really eye-opening and something that I sort of tucked away for the longer term. And in parallel to working in AmeriCorps, I got a master's degree in public policy from Northwestern University. And then upon graduation, moved to Los Angeles to work for a hedge fund. I think going from AmeriCorps to hedge fund is another one of those somewhat unusual career paths. But I had that unlock around money, and I felt like getting myself really versed and equipped in how the financial system worked was going to be important for my career. And that was something that I saw even growing up. My dad lost his parents young. He started as a janitor, and he worked really hard. He had a lot of opportunities and privilege afforded to him as a white man working in the US, but he still really had to make his way. He didn't have a college degree. He didn't have a lot of things that then became so important for him to give to us. And I saw the relationship that he had with money and the way that it helped him create opportunities for our family that didn't necessarily exist for him. And so that became a part of the way that I view the world. And I knew I wanted to be really literate and versed in that. And so I went to work for this hedge fund on the West Coast. This was 2007. And so the subprime end of the market was collapsing. Global financial liquidity was starting to dry up. It was baptism by fire for sure. And so I came on board at a time when we were all kind of unpacking what was unfolding around us. And you were looking at storied investment banks like Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers falling apart. The investor experience is very much looking at companies at different phases of their growth trajectory and understanding what works and what doesn't work. What does a good management team look like? What is a good supply chain? How much of your revenue should you reinvest in marketing for customer acquisition? And so you're just learning all of this and looking at various different businesses. We invested on the short side and the long side. So we also looked at businesses that seemed to be overvalued. And that kind of foundation and that pattern recognition, I think, is for me at least, it was a real privilege to start my career in that way and start to begin to develop an understanding around that rhythm and what it is to be a public company. I did get to a point though where that purpose piece in me, the piece that had worked in the south side of Chicago, I had seen my father's experience growing up, and I wanted to do something that felt like it was true to that mission. And I sort of took the analytical skills that I had developed at the hedge fund and I moved those over to strategy consulting. And I worked at a boutique firm in Los Angeles that focused on social impact, sustainability, philanthropy. And they had historically worked with a lot of high net worth individuals and high profile celebrity clients, but really wanted to build out a corporate practice. And that was the skill set that I brought as a result of the time I spent investing. And so I was lucky enough to get to work with businesses like Gucci, who are 100 years old and have, sustainability and social impact in their DNA, but wanted to do more and bring that to the fore and use that as a customer acquisition tool and also a loyalty channel for their employee base as well as their client base. Got to work with 23andMe in the early days of setting up their business model, and of course now that is a huge global company. And so I think, again, strategy consulting is you're working on various different projects, different companies, phases of growth. I have enough professional ADD that I just loved having my hands in so many different things. And that curiosity of kind of understanding how business worked was important in that phase. I think one of the challenges that many consultants feel over time, though, is that you do all this work, you build this incredible strategy, and then you ultimately hand it off to someone else to implement. And I wanted to learn how to operate and really be the one that brought those projects forward and brought them to life and kind of got up to my elbows in that. And so I joined a startup here in Austin and worked with a founder that I really respected and admired. And he had been at the front lines of building consumer-facing digital businesses from the very early days, pre-dot-com bubble. And I felt like I could learn a ton from him about building and scaling a digital business. And, when you're starting from the ground up, it's everything from like, oh yeah, let's make sure we get health insurance for people, to setting up the supply chain, to figuring out early marketing and customer acquisition strategies. And I loved just being in all of the different pieces of the business. And then the Bumble opportunity came along, and it was sort of the accumulation of all of those experiences. It took pieces from the investor experience. It took pieces from the consulting experience, certainly the mission-driven piece, and thinking about how you build social good into the DNA of a company and how you set yourself apart competitively by standing for something, which was so critical to Whitney as she was kind of setting up the early Bumble brand and infrastructure. And I joined that business 4 years ago, and it was 30 people in a 2-bedroom apartment, working very closely with our parent company, which at the time was based in London. And I felt like it was this really unique opportunity to kind of roll up my sleeves, get involved in something that was clearly special and had set itself apart in the eyes of the consumer and was becoming an app of choice and an alternative to some of the others in the marketplace. And I wanted to be a part of that magic, but help them build the scale and infrastructure without kind of crushing in on it. And it was an incredible ride. I think about all of the various things that we touched in the time that I was in the business, and everything from bringing Bumble to India and getting to think about the cultural localization that needed to happen. Not just how do we translate the app into Hindi, but also how do we make Bumble relevant for an audience that has different attitudes about marriage and dating, and how do we become a vital tool for the women in that economy who are growing in their own empowerment and who are wanting to make different decisions about who they date. And so that was an incredible experience. Getting to launch Bumble Fund, which was our corporate investment vehicle, which is how you and I got connected originally, and thinking about how do we take what we've learned and invest in the next stage of businesses. And we did that early. We did that probably before we have the war chest that most corporate VCs have, but we cared deeply about investing in women founders, especially those that identified as LGBTQ or were women of color. And we wanted to put some of that capital to work and some of our experience to work in helping them build and scale their businesses. And, I could go on and on about the things that really stood out for me at Bumble. Of course, the IPO being a big part of it. But I think for me, those threads around social impact and purpose and wanting to be a part of a business that stands for more than just growth of the top line and bottom line profitability, but also making an impact on the communities that it serves. That's been critical for me throughout that journey.
That's quite the journey. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, it's what I really love is the change that seems to be happening. That now, when someone considers their career, the first thought is what is it going to make an impact? So it's no longer about okay, you need to make some money as well, but people don't want to, don't really want to join a company that brings more harm than good, and that.
I think that's right. And I think that that values alignment is really important. And as I see, as we build our team, as I see, connections of mine that are coming out of university or coming out of high school and thinking about what's going to be next for them, I'm just so impressed with the holistic way that they think about building their career. Exactly as you said, like, yes, of course, we need to make a living wage and be able to support ourselves and our families. But if I'm going to dedicate 8, 10, 12, 14, I mean, how many hours in the day to something, I want to enjoy the people that I'm around, and I want to feel like it's building something bigger than just putting a paycheck in my bank account. And I think that bodes really well for the next generation of companies. And we see that happening in, things that are more environmentally conscious and building electric vehicles, for instance, or thinking about other inputs into our the future of the green economy. And so I'm inspired by everything that's kind of on the horizon in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's kind of more impact by design, which I think needed to happen. And one thing that I'm really happy with is that it seems that statistically, impact and ESG focused investment portfolios overperform the normal ones. So it's like an investment advisor will ask you, like, do you want to invest in the sustainable portfolio or the unsustainable one? So I think the unsustainable should just like leave soon. Hopefully it does.
Yeah, and I think the data speaks, right? And so I think we see that when it comes to women-led companies or diversity on boards or ESG. I think, having been an investor myself, often the money is cautious and the money wants to go where there's proven outcomes, or at least, I mean, of course, investors take big bets, but they're accountable to their shareholders. And so they want to have a justification for why they're doing things often. And so the more that the data can represent that these things represent stronger business opportunities, stronger investment opportunities, I think that's part of why Bumble's IPO is significant, right? It shows the sheer scale of a woman-founded company, and not only the top-line growth that it can achieve, but also the impressive profitability. And I think the more we see examples like Whitney and others, and Stitch Fix and Katrina Lake and so forth, the more that hopefully gives folks the confidence that this is not just window dressing, or they're not just making that investment because it feels like morally the right thing to do, but it's actually a better investment. And I think ESG is going to continue to be the same thing. I hope that we move faster in some of our progress towards both that and investing in diverse-led companies.
Absolutely. But moving on from this sort of from the Bumble story and your personal career, which is so versatile. I really love it. Coming from the musician background. If you think through all of it, what were some of the biggest challenges in the career that you had to overcome?
Oh, that's a great question. I think there's an interesting intersection for me of a personal challenge and a professional challenge, and it relates to motherhood. So early in my career, when I started managing people, I found that I was a great manager if the people I was managing operated just like me, and they thought like me. They could sort of see the strategy that I was going to put in place, and they became like an extension of that. And I really struggled to manage folks that I didn't, and I would hold this high bar, and I felt like they were falling short on it, and I couldn't figure out the right way to make that relationship click. And I, now look back and realize how selfish that was. But the unlock for me was having a kid and realizing that it's actually my duty to motivate, as opposed to their duty to figure out how to be a copycat. And I learned that with my child. I couldn't tell her to eat sweet potatoes or eat carrots or go to bed at 6:30 p.m. I had to motivate her to do that. And I had to set up the right circumstances in which she could thrive. Right. And so I had to create the carrots in the right bite-sized pieces and let her feed herself. And then suddenly it was wonderful. Or I had to take her on the right set of activities and walks in the afternoon so she was tired enough to go to bed. And when I created the right framework and when I motivated her to do what ultimately was going to serve both of us, then suddenly she could get there. And I realized that that framework absolutely translated to my professional life as well. And so I can remember this one particular employee where I was struggling. I felt like she was falling short on that bar. And I realized that her set of motivations were different. And I hadn't set her up to be successful because I hadn't set her up to be motivated. And so what felt arduous, because I had this bar and I expected her to achieve it, and I set guidelines out around it, once I suddenly restructured that in a way that made her feel empowered, autonomous, like she could actually shape things and see her fingerprints on it, the quality of the work skyrocketed. And so much of that was me understanding what my role as a leader and manager was, which is to create that motivation, to create the framework for them to succeed, not for them to continue to lift me up. And that, that was a big challenge for me to overcome early in my career. And I think most people who have transitioned to manager and then ultimately leader recognize that at each of those inflection points, there's a new role for you to play. And the biggest part isn't around your technical skills or how well you can build spreadsheets or PowerPoint presentations. It's about how you can build and grow and scale and empower teams. And I think that consciousness and intentionality around who are the lead, what is the type of leader that you want to be, is really critically important.
Wow, that's, I think this is the ideal leader summed up. Like, you can't force people to do things just because, they have to. If you motivate people in the workplace, they will actually do a lot more. And exactly. I love how this is becoming like the philosophy in management. If we look back probably even 10 years or less, in some places, like things have been completely the opposite to that.
So I think we're all still really learning, I don't have it figured out. No one does, but that consciousness and intentionality, I think, is a really key piece.
Yes, absolutely. But moving on to some, I would say not so nice numbers. So talking about IPOs and specifically about IPOs that were led by women. So there's only a handful of them. In 2020, just under 500 companies IPO'd in the US only, and 4 of them were led by women. And since 2013, there have been a total of 18 companies going public with women as CEOs from a total of 2,000 IPOs. So this is one statistic that really shocked me. So what do you think is the issue here? Because we have demonstrated that women are wonderful leaders. So why are the numbers like this, in your opinion?
Oh, those numbers are frustrating. And I think there's clearly still a long way to go. And I think all of us wish that it could happen faster. And unfortunately, because there are entrenched barriers in the system, it is going to take time. But I do feel like there's momentum. Whitney's IPO of Bumble demonstrates that. And I think the more examples we can point to, the more that helps the investor community, et cetera, get comfortable. The money is a big part of it, coming back to a theme that I started on earlier. And for decades, investors have looked for that pattern recognition, and they look at the examples of companies that get from itty bitty seed all the way to IPO. And there's a certain kind of entrepreneur that in their mind is the example of what that looks like. And so it feels like the safer bet to continue to funnel money towards those. And my hope is that examples like Whitney and others start to really reframe a lot of that for folks. So I think a big piece of it, of course, is tied back to the investor community. I do remember a time pre-COVID, because we're not doing this as much anymore, where I went to 2 events back to back in an evening. One of them was a group of individuals at pre-public and public companies, and it was a very homogenous room, if you will. It was a lot of lovely but middle-aged white men. And I stood out in that moment, even as a woman. And then later that evening, I was a judge at a pitch competition for seed stage companies. And the diversity of that audience was so inspiring. For women, there were people of color, representatives of the LGBTQ community, people with different physical abilities, etc. And it was so inspiring to feel like, okay, the energy is here. And if we look at the next class of businesses that are coming, there's this recognition that those individuals are better equipped to serve and to create a vibrant economy because they understand the audiences that they're trying to serve. And so that inspired me in the sense that like it's coming, and I see the momentum. And I think the more we have conversation, the more women that are VCs, the more people of color that are VCs, the more that we are changing investment landscape, the more that we're also going to see that changing the founder landscape. And we have to start there in order to get to a place of IPO. But it's taking longer than any of us want to. And I think that's where ongoing discussions about it, making sure that the media is covering it, making sure that we don't stop having a conversation that I think a lot of us feel like we've been having for a long time because we haven't solved it yet. And the IPO being sort of the seminal example of success in business, we need to funnel more funding in that direction and elevate more women leaders and people of color leaders and highlight those examples and the impact that they do drive for investment portfolios.
Absolutely. Yeah. Also, for me, what really important element is that as we see women succeed, it inspires more women, and they know it's possible because it should be possible, and it is. Now moving on to has your key one of your how do I put this one of your key skills is building teams. So if we think of everything that you've been talking about, diversity and all of that, so we have so much data now that shows us that diverse teams perform better. So what are your thoughts on this? Why isn't it still done by design when we are designing new teams?
It's a really good question. I think there are a couple different barriers that exist, and I think so much of it is influenced by the stage of the company that you're in. In early stage companies, often you're raising money on a PowerPoint and a big idea, right? And the folks that you can bring along on that journey with you sometimes look an awful lot like you because you're pulling them from your friend community, and you're pulling them from people who already believe in you or are willing to take a risk on you. And it takes that extra layer, right, of looking outside of your community and yourself to try to bring in those more diverse audiences. So I think there's a piece around intentionality there. I think when it comes to later stage companies that have resources and have HR departments and are putting real strategy in place around people and diversity, like then it comes down to real will. And the hard thing when a company is growing very fast is, you want the seat full quickly. Ideally, you want the right person, but the job needed to start yesterday. And so when networks don't exist that are inherently diverse, you're more likely to pull somebody that is like you and can quickly fill the seat. And so it does take real intentionality in the recruitment process to ensure a diverse slate of candidates and to design. I loved the way that you said earlier, impact by design or diversity by design. I think that intentionality has to be there, and we have to stay committed to those objectives. And we do see the output down the line. As you said, it creates stronger businesses. And so taking a bit longer with the search in order to ensure that a diverse candidate ends up in seat, I think is well worth the extra energy, but it can feel very challenging in that moment when you're like, we needed that human 3 days ago. And so I think that, again, the more we have these conversations, the more that we are building diverse networks. And I think you've seen the rise of, whether it's Chief and what they're doing for women, and whether it's the VCs like Harlem Capital that are building a real stable of strong people of color who are great operators. We need to build and elevate and celebrate these networks and lean on them more frequently as we're starting to look for great candidates to fill those roles.
Absolutely. I agree. But enough about work talk. let's move a little bit to, you know, what are the more significant role models? Who has inspired you in your life that you can think of?
Oh my gosh. I mean, without being too corny, and I alluded to this earlier, my dad is a big part of that. I think, you know, what I saw him achieve without a college degree, with a lot of really hard work from a place of just absolute humility. I mean, he started as a janitor for a pharmaceutical company and worked his way up to a place where he was leading their global technology and designing machines and caring deeply for people. And I feel like that influenced a lot of my leadership philosophy. I mean, if you were to ask him, he would tell you that he wasn't a great manager. He was definitely more of a rock star individual contributor, but he cared deeply about teams and cared deeply about the individual humans. And he was out there on the floor, even when he was in a place where he had, you know, his own office. He was out there on the floor with the teams that were manufacturing the drugs and cleaning the machines. And that was where he wanted to be, right? He always wanted to sort of be in the mix alongside folks, never in an ivory tower. And I think a lot of that influenced my leadership philosophy as well. And you can probably tell, given how I'm talking about him in the past tense, that he's no longer with us. And he passed about 5 years ago. And one of the hardest things as I've sort of navigated subsequent career decisions, et cetera, is like he was always the cheerleader. He was the one that I would go to with the, you know, should I think about it this way or this way? Or when I had multiple job offers, you know, what's the right framework for deciding which one to take? And now, you know, I can have those same conversations with my siblings. I see pieces of him in them, and I feel pieces of him in me. And I think that, you know, as much as there are like so many incredible professionals that I admire and, you know, amazing CEOs, et cetera, like, honestly, it's probably my dad who has had the most outsized influence. And I'm just extremely grateful for that.
Wow, that's really heartwarming. I'm sorry he's not no longer with us, but he's definitely steered you in the right direction. Sounds wonderful.
Thank you.
So let's see. Now that you've gone through this really cool sort of whirlwind of a career, taking bits from different places and making companies successful. So as the Bumble chapter has closed with, you know, the ultimate thing that everyone wishes for in business, a successful exit. So what are your plans next? What's the next chapter for you as a person?
It's a great question. I mean, we rescued another dog, so there are little things like that that have been filling my day. I think we're still in the tail end of pandemic and some of those restrictions, and so I feel like I'm doing the classic pandemic projects of baking banana bread and landscaping, and I have more houseplants than I can count now. But really, I think intellectually, where I'm excited is to integrate the learnings of the last handful of years and think about, okay, how do I now go back as an advisor, as a board member, as an investor, and think about taking those learnings and sharing it with other CEOs and management teams and you know, letting that inform my philosophy around the way that I want to invest and advise. And I think that's what's really energized me in the last handful of months, is looking at how many incredible new companies are out there that are solving really big, meaty problems, or that have come up with really unique, innovative solutions to legacy problems, and providing whatever little bit of counsel or advice or resources that I can. And so been really excited to do that recently. I think especially in the earlier stages, I've made a handful of angel investments, mostly to women founders. And I'm just so excited by what they're building. And I think that does inspire me that Bumble and Whitney, like, women are not going to be the anomaly. Someday it won't be only 20 out of 500. Someday it will get to half. I am confident. I think that day right now is very far away, but there are ways that we can continue to shift momentum and make sure that we're elevating and empowering those leaders and funneling more venture capital, more private equity, growth equity to those types of companies, and coming up with new funding models that aren't just, the traditional seed, Series A, Series B, but that are backed by incubators, or that are backed by different types of growth vehicles, corporate investing vehicles. I think we need to open up the framework around the way we even think about how companies get started, in addition to the way that we're thinking about growing and scaling leaders within businesses to create more diversity. But I think the initiatives exist. We just need more momentum around them.
Absolutely. But I guess, we're going in the right direction. So I think
I think so. Too slowly, but I think so.
Yes, it is slow. It is definitely slow, and the numbers are still rather shocking. So women raising between 1% to 3% of the total capital. I mean, it's not really acceptable. I recently read an article that summed up that if progress in France continues as it has been for the past 20 years, they will see equality in 1,000 years. So, yeah. But this is why I believe that we need to keep talking about it. Yes, the story is getting a bit old, but if we stop talking about it, then we go back a few steps.
Right, that doesn't solve the problem, right? When we see these stubborn numbers, as you said, like 2-ish% of venture capital going to women founders, it's been that way for years. And probably like you, I feel like we've been having this conversation for years, but stopping the conversation isn't going to solve the problem. I think what we need to do is continue to look upstream, continue to understand what are the inputs that are leading to this, and brick by brick, starting to find those inflection points and disrupt them, and get more women seats at the table as investors, get more people of color in seats as investors, continue to do the work that we're doing on boards. One of the things that best prepares individuals for CEO service or ultimate, C-level service is a board seat, is to be able to see companies at different stages of their growth. And so a lot of these initiatives around getting more women on boards, getting more people of color on boards, that's a really important starting point. And we need to continue to put pressure on that and keep up the momentum there. And I've been so impressed by, whether it's Goldman Sachs or the state of California, the way that we're thinking about this and creating new regulatory policy, the companies and banks creating initiatives themselves. We need to keep that momentum going, because as you're right, if we stay at the same pace, it'll be thousands of years. We know that some of these things are proven. We need to move faster.
Absolutely. But Sarah, it's been so wonderful hearing all of this and your experiences. So usually I end my podcast with one last question. So what would be the one piece of key advice that you would like to give women or men who are watching? What would be the key advice you would give them?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one. I think, and maybe this is just me reflecting on getting closer to middle age, don't be so hard on yourself. And truly, as I look back at my own career path and have gone from music to public service to hedge fund land to, now ending up in tech, I think there are very few people who have it totally figured out. And I think a lot of us look at folks around us and have imposter syndrome because we see these successful individuals and we think, I will never get there. And I think the reality is no one has it all figured out. And if they appear to have it figured out in their professional life, maybe they don't on the home front, or I'm still figuring out remote school and what to do with my children at the moment. Nobody has it all together. And I think so much of what makes life worth living is in the smaller things day to day, and in the ability to stop and slow down and enjoy the moments that you're in. And when we're constantly forcing ourselves to strive for more and more and holding up this impossible bar for ourselves, we're missing the best part. And I think if there's anything that I've learned in the last year, it's really that. It's to slow down and take it all in and remember what really matters and not beat myself up for the things that don't.
Wonderful. That's some powerful stuff. I will definitely keep that in mind myself. So thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for the whole show. I'm sure that this will inspire many people. And
Thank you.
I welcome everyone to come and view the next episode next week. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Liina. Great talking with you.